Amazing music, isn't it? Why don't you give them another round of applause? You guys treat me, I need to come here more often is what I need to do. Because when I leave here, I feel like I am somebody. Because you guys treat me so well. I appreciate that so much. I want you to turn in your Bibles, if you brought one, to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. I learned something in the last couple of weeks that I didn't understand. Some of you will probably say it's elementary and you knew it already, but I didn't know this. The steam engines that they used to use to tug along the trains, and they do all those. While they were preparing them to be able to tote the cars up and down the tracks with the water and everything that was in there to make the steam work, from 0 to 211 degrees, they call the water cold, lukewarm, warm, hot, and then when it reaches 212 degrees, it begins to bubble. It begins to boil, is what we call it. It's boiling water. But when it crosses over the 212 mark to 213 and above, something happens to the water and is called supercharged or superheated water. And that supercharged, superheated water, the steam that comes off of that, has great power, and that's what enables that locomotive to be able to tug the cars everywhere that they go. And here we are at the precipice of the year 2013. Now I realize that some people see the name 13 and immediately, or the number 13, and immediately they think, oh, it's going to be a terrible year. It's a bad luck thing, 13. Well, personally, I have never really given in to all that kind of 13 and all that. It is interesting to me when I go to a hotel and it has 44 floors that it really only has 43 floors because somehow they got rid of the 13th floor. I don't know how they did that. I don't know how they do that. You go in there and you push, because there's no 13 on most elevators. I'm not sure how they engineered that, because I count them, it's still the same, but I don't know how they do it. And some of us are like that. And there was a group of us in this room that, say this with me. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
You're my friend. There are some people in this room that you couldn't stay positive for a nanosecond if your life depended on it. There are some people that when they look at something, they instantly, boom, they find what's wrong with it. Do you know anybody like that? I know it's not you. Don't point to the person next to you. Don't even look at them, okay? Don't do that, because you'll get in trouble. You'll find out just how sharp their elbow is if you look at them. There's another group of us in this room that we really want to see what's good about things, and we buy into it for a moment, but it's almost like a warped board, and we flip right back. And as soon as somebody brings something positive to us, we buy into it for a second, and then we start pointing out what's going to happen. It's bad. It's going to be, yeah, I know the sun's up and there's no clouds out there, but just let me tell you, there's some clouds coming. There's some of us that are like that, aren't we? And then there's another group of us that is just kind of odd. We're just different. It's hard for us to find a negative thing. Let me describe one to you. My mom is like that. This time last year, just before Christmas, my mother, who is 74 now, 74, she has COPD and emphysema, all of it self-inflicted because she smoked for all those years. She was tugging along her little man, the oxygen tank, her little man, She had just come out of oxygen therapy, breathing therapy. She was getting ready to get into my sister-in-law's car, and when she stepped down off the curb, she put her foot on the wheel of the little oxygen deal, and my mom did a face plant. Went right down, kablowie, right in the pavement of the parking lot. She hit her face. I mean, it was like a nosedive, like nobody's business. Boom! She tore her face up, broke her tooth, busted her nose up, had to get stitches all through here. We rushed to the hospital because we didn't know how bad it was. X-rays then came in. It showed that my mom had broke her neck. Broke her neck. Okay, so my mom has got this distorted face, tore up lip. Looks like she's been in it looks like she's been in a bad fight and she didn't come out well. You know, that's what she looked like. She sort of looked like that mixed martial arts guy last night who lost the belt after the fight. I don't know if any of you saw that, because, you know, us churchy people, we don't watch anything like that, right? We don't watch anything like that. But he looked like him, and you couldn't get my mom to complain. You could not get my mom to complain. The doctor came in and said, well, because your mom is this age and because this and this, we're just going to send her home with this brace. And I said, whoa. She's got a broken neck. Well, we stitched up her lip. I said, she's got a broken neck. You can't see. So I went and spent the night with her. We went the next day and we got a second opinion. They eventually, by Friday, that happened on a Monday, Friday that next week, they did surgery on her neck and put a screw in my mom's neck. Okay? So effectively, my mom does not have a loose screw because it's in there real tight. We just had it checked. But you couldn't get a complaining thing out of my mom. She's so positive. And there are some people that's like that, aren't there? They just see the bright side. My mom said, at least I'm here. You couldn't get her to complain. Everybody else is complaining, but she's like that. And there's a few of us that are just odd like that. It's hard for us to complain, right? But most of us are not like that. We're not like that. And approaching this year, 2013, on your bulletin it says a fresh start. I like to think about it like this. Imagine more. Even when I say that, those ones in here that are negative, immediately you think, I don't want any more of what I've already had. There's no way, because I've had some bad stuff. I don't want no more. I'm not talking about the bad stuff. Okay? And then there's some of you, as soon as I start saying the positive things, I'm thinking I don't want to take a trip with Tim. Think about this. You get in an accident, you step out the car, and you're falling, and he tackles you, and then he tells everybody about it. That's right. You know? And then he says it's okay because his dad would have said it was all right. You know, so I've just decided I'm not taking a trip with Tim, you know, especially in the snow and ice. You know, he thinks he's tackled a man. Oh! And so anyway, when I talk about imagine more, I'm talking about more good things. I'm talking about more things in your life that you really, really want. That's what I'm talking about. And I really live my life this way. I believe that God has intentions for us to have more of the good stuff in life. I believe that. Now, if you're like me, even in the midst of all of that he has intended for you, I've made some less than wise choices in my life. And as a result of those less than wise choices, I went down a road that I really don't know that he originally planned for me to go. And as a result of that, there's a lot of thorn bushes on this road that I chose to go down. There's a lot of thistles. There's a lot of stuff, things down that road that bring about heartache. But even in the midst of that, if I can learn how to reframe some of those things, God's grace can come to my life during the middle of those things, down that road that I wasn't even supposed to be on in the first place. And I can imagine more, not only for my life, but those people around me that I'm called and placed in their lives to influence. I just believe that. I just believe that. Now, it'd be really cool to hang out here in this building, this cocoon of a building. Because you come here, and what is there here? There's peace, isn't there? Lots of peace. There's lots of love. There's lots of acceptance, isn't there? I mean, and it would be cool to be able to hang out here all the time. And I mean, you guys let me come here once a year because you can only stand me once a year. I understand that, you know. And during that one time, you think I'm pretty good, but I have a friend that's here today. She can vouch. You don't want to be around him all the time. Okay, this is my friend Annette over here. She can vouch for you. You don't want to, all right? This is the deal, though. If we stayed here all the time, eventually even this would become an issue for us. Because the truth is, we're not called to be here 24/7. And there's a reason why. There's a reason why. There are people outside of this place that desperately needs what we come here to get. And they can't get that if we're always here. They need us to be in their lives. They need us to do that. And so when I talk about more, that's what I'm talking about. More of the best that there is. And the best that there is with people. It really is. Now here's the trouble. Those people that you're called and placed in their lives to influence, they have troubles, don't they? They have heartache. They have financial dilemmas. They have illness dilemmas. They have relationship dilemmas. They have dilemma after dilemma after dilemma. They have family issues, don't they? Now, so you spend time imagining more time with them to influence them to have what you have. But here's what happens. To think like that, which is the right way to think, means that you're really asking for more of what they're experiencing to sort of come into your life so that you can demonstrate in front of them what it is to have a relationship with God. Because really, it's sort of like this. I don't know if you remember before you started hanging out at church. I remember what it was like before I started hanging out at church. And remember, you already said, I'm Matt and I'm your friend. Before I started hanging out at church, I thought the weirdest people on the planet were those that went to church. I mean, you think about it. They get up early in the morning on Sundays and they go down to church. And then they stand and they sing and they do these calisthenic things where they stand, they sit, they stand, they sit. They're not sure if they're supposed to be standing or sitting. And if you're a guest there, you lost. Because when you're standing, they're sitting. When they're sitting, you're all confused. And when I first started going to church, we sang out of songbooks. And if you didn't know church, songbooks were really confusing to the unchurched person. Right? I mean, now we sing up there and we do it what I would consider right. One line after another. In a songbook, it's not done like that. You sing the first line in this box, and then you jump down to the next box, and you sing the first line in that, and I was always the guy that was in the first box singing all four lines. And I wouldn't want to be the third verse in a song that was sang at church. It's the most unliked verse of all. I'm singing the third verse. Nobody sings the third verse. And so I'm trying to sing that. I can't sing. And church was just odd. And even to make it worse, you know what they did? They not only came on Sunday mornings, they sat in a class, and then they went to church. Then they went somewhere and they ate. Then they went home and did some, and then they came back Sunday night. What is up with that? And even weirder, they came back during the middle of the week. And they acted like they liked it. You know, and so it didn't work for me. That was one of the reasons I didn't go. But something happened to me. On an Easter Sunday morning, I went. And something instantaneously happened to me. That night, I was dragging somebody to church. Telling them it was great. I'd never been to a Sunday night church, but they told me to come, and since something happened to me that morning, I was ready to come that night. And that's what we want to happen in people's lives, don't we? And that's really just a part of what we want. What we want to happen in people's lives is them to have peace. Isn't that really what we want? But to want that, we have to embrace some things. So I want you to look with me and read verse 15 and 16 in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. 15 says this, "For all things are for your sake, that grace, having spread through the many, may cause thanksgiving and abound to the glory of God." The very next verse, verse 16, says this, "Therefore, we do not lose heart." Therefore, we do not lose heart. Why in the world would one passage talk about grace and thanksgiving, and the very first phrase of the next verse say, "Therefore, we do not lose heart"? It almost seems like it's out of sync, like it's out of character. But when we understand what's really going on here, then we get a glimpse of why it's like this. Let's, for a second, just spend some time on the word grace. Before we came to church, before we came into this community, when we heard the word grace, we thought grace was this. Grace was how you walked. Right? It's how you walked. It's how you carried yourself. It's how and where you sat at the dinner table and how you went about what you did. But when we came to church, we learned something about this thing called grace, and we found that what it is the unmerited favor of God. The unmerited favor of God. Yet in truth, it's so much more than just the unmerited favor of God. What grace is that moment that happened to me on an Easter Sunday morning, and that moment that's happened to each and every one of us in this room that have met Christ. And that is that moment where all of a sudden our thinking, where I was at, where church was weird, people that went to church was weird, that moment where God was just a God, there was no way to have a relationship with him, that moment where all of a sudden, instantaneously, you know that Jesus is the answer. You know that. A nanosecond ago, you didn't know that, and now you do. That's when grace comes into your life. And now you receive the unmerited favor of God. Anybody know what I'm talking about? It happens to you, doesn't it? And boom, you know that he loves you. He loves you regardless of what you did, what you do, or what you will do. And he will always be there for you. That's what grace is. But there's another side to grace. And the other side of grace is, I think, is what is being spoken about right here. And that is when we realize that grace energizes us to do things. It energizes us, and it really makes us almost like a portal of God's character to humanity. It creates us almost like a peephole into the eternal. We become the access point for other people to receive grace, and then thanksgiving abounds from that. How does that happen, though? How does that happen? I think we imagine that it happens by just being safe all the time and always having really good things happen in our life, and the way we rejoice and praise God over the good things in our life. Yet, I'm learning that that's really not the access point. The access point that other people see the presence of the eternal in your life is when they see you struggling through some of the very same things they struggle through, and you struggle differently. You struggle with a hope. You struggle with a purpose. Because this grace is upon you. This unmerited favor is upon you. Something happens during that. And when that happens, you're able to demonstrate mercy and redemption to other people, because now you know what it is to have had grace and mercy and redemption in your own life. And so you become this portal, this access point, this viewer, this peephole into the majestic, into the eternal. And something really amazing happens in our lives. There are 3 people in the Bible that all of us know that in the next few moments, I'd like you to kind of travel with me to them and see them for a minute. We're all influencers. Every single one of us are influencers. And in 2013, if we want to have more in our lives, one of the greatest things that we have to do is not lose heart. We have to have this grace that flows through us, that abounds in thanksgiving, not losing heart. Not losing heart. And to not lose heart, you have to reframe difficulties. You have to look at hardships different. You have to look at pressure different. You have to look at dilemmas different. You have to reframe them. Now, the first guy I want you to meet, I would call him the reluctant leader. I would call him the reluctant leader, the one that says, no, not me. I don't really think I can have a ministry. I don't think I'm an influencer. I don't think I'm a leader. See, and I think he is one of those guys that's like most of us. Most of us in this room, even though destiny lies within you, as it lies within this fellow I'm going to introduce to you in just a minute, most of us know destiny lies within us, but we don't know what that destiny is. I don't think he knew what it was. But he was the guy that was being prayed for by thousands, sought after by a moment in history, and he didn't know it was him that people were after. But something was in him that caused him to move or gravitate towards this location. And it was that grace, that unmerited favor in his life that he didn't even realize it was towards him at that time. It's a word they didn't even use at that time. You know him as Moses. You know him as Moses. Now think about this for a second. Moses is born in a time where his people were not looked on very well. They were going to begin to kill some people, and they tossed him in a floating device, a little bassinet boat type thing, and circumstances, he floated, and a lady who's part of the leadership of this nation that puts people down, puts Israelites down, and uses them as animals, finds this little child and decides to raise this child as her own. She didn't know the destiny that he had. He doesn't know. She just knows she wanted a man-child, and she wanted to take care of this child. Well, as time goes on, and this calling, this thing inside of him begins to sort of burst out of him. This embryo of destiny that's inside of him begins to grow. He doesn't even understand it. He doesn't really understand it. But something happens, and one day he's standing watching what I am sure he has seen thousands of times. He's standing watching another human being be treated poorly. And in his situation, I am certain that he's seen that thousands of times before. But this day, the now and the eternal would cross lines. And Moses made an overcorrection. He overreacted. And as a result of that, a man lost his life. Now, I know none of you in this room have ever overreacted. Right? You've never overreacted. You've never said something more than you should have said. Right? You've never done that. You've never gone further down a road than you should have gone. You've never overreacted. You've never said anything to your spouse that you wish you could take back. You've never said something to your children, because after all, you go to church. Right? You have great pastors, and look, you have Tim. You have Tim, who will tackle you if you're falling down. I'm sorry, Tim. You threw yourself under the bus, okay? But I know you guys, but you know people that are like this. I'm like this. I overreact. I've overreacted. I'm the guy that does. And he overreacts, and rather than saying, oh my goodness, I really messed up, because his place in the nation there, if he would have went and said, guess what I did today? I killed somebody. What do you think they would have done? What do you think Pharaoh, his dad and his mom and all them would have done? They'd have covered it up. It had never been known. but he runs from his growing embryo of destiny inside of him. And I know, again, none of you in this room have ever ran from what you're supposed to do. See, some people know what they're supposed to do. Most of us don't, do we? Most of us don't. Most of us just exist. Most of us just do things. Like, he was there, he was in that situation. This next guy, I don't know that he ever really knew what his ultimate calling was or is. He was a resolved guy. The first one is the reluctant leader, the reluctant influencer. The second one I would call the resolved leader. Wherever he was going to do the very best job he could. His name is David. David. Now, David, let me tell you what happens to resolved leaders. Resolved leaders are a lot of times just kind of forgotten. It almost feels like you're put on the back shelf. Because nobody really recognizes you. Nobody really points at you and says, oh, they've got future in them. And they didn't do that to David in the beginning of his life. In fact, circumstances had worked out in the nation's history where they needed a new king. God speaks to the prophet. The preacher shows up at Jesse's house. One of your sons are going to be the new king. And so I need to find him and anoint him so he can be the new king. So he calls all the boys together. Dad leaves one out. Because, he's just a ruddy looking boy. But what he's doing, Sandra, in his place, in his position in life, he's being loyal to his position. Just like many of us, most of us in this room. As dads, we're being loyal to being a dad, aren't we? We're being the very best dad we can. As moms, we're being the very best moms that we can. As grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles, we're being the very best that we know how to be. As employees, we're being the very best we can be. We're being resolved in doing the very best we can where we're at. And that's what David did. He was a couple of hills away taking care of the sheep, and he had taken care of his family's sheep, his dad's sheep, but he took care of them as though they were his, to the point where he fought off some wild animals and won the battle to protect the sheep. We do that every day, don't we? Most of us in this room do not have a quote-unquote calling on our life. We don't know what the mission of our life is. And so we're the best wife, the best grandmother, the best grandfather, the best we can be, aren't we? So they call. The preacher says, it's not one of these guys. Calls David over. David comes walking up, and he is the new king. He's the new king. He's anointed to be the new king, and because he's the resolved kind of guy, he becomes the new king. It takes years for it to take place where he actually takes the throne, but he's the new guy. Now remember, when you're in these situations, see, for Moses, people prayed for him. They didn't know it was him. They did the same thing for David. The people of the nation prayed for a king. They prayed for a leader. They prayed for a leader, not knowing it was David. David didn't even know it was him, and David was just resolved to do his very best. This next guy is a guy that I would think is a resistant guy. He is a guy that, he's the guy that people would say this, really? Really? And I think I sometimes represent that guy. Really? Matt? Come on. If you knew me growing up, you would say that. You would say that. And this guy, his name was Saul for a season of his life. Saul was going to church. Saul was in a belief system. He was the kind of guy that none of us are. He was the kind of guy that if he met you at Starbucks, he would force you to believe his way. He was the guy that if you was in a chat room with him on the internet, He's the guy that's so hard-headed and narrow-minded that he would force you to believe exactly like he believes, because that's the only way to believe. Which none of us are like that, I'm sure. Right? Never been like that, have we? He's the kind of guy that would force his belief system down you so badly that anybody that believed differently than him, he went and got letters so that he could throw people in prison because they believed differently than he did. Now, none of us would do that, right? None of us at all would be in the Bible study, and when somebody has an alternative view than we do, none of us would say, "What are you talking about? You know that's not from God." None of us would do anything like that, right? We would not be that hard-headed. But he was. And he was the guy that was everybody would say, "Really? Him?" Yet what he didn't know is he's being prayed about. He was being prayed about. And that's why I say I think me, was a lot like that. I think I was the guy that church people would pray about, because at one point during my rebellious life, I was the guy that snuck into church after it got started so I could leave before it got over. And I sat on the back row, and I had long hair, and I was the one that didn't fit in. And so I'm sure people prayed about me. I can just imagine some grandfathers praying, "Oh God, that guy that snuck in the church service, can you just make sure he doesn't meet any of my grandchildren?" Please, God, if I've ever done anything good, just protect my grandchildren from the likes of that guy. Don't you think Saul was probably prayed for like that? Church would get together, and when they prayed for Saul, probably very few people prayed, "Could you just save him?" Most people prayed for protection from him. Don't you think so? I think Matt was prayed about like that quite a bit, because I was the most unlikely person. My grandparents were the only ones that really saw hope and destiny in me. My dad was the one that would say, "Oh, this kid. Oh, this kid." And my mom, she just loved me. She just loved me no matter what. But I think church people prayed about me more than anything else, especially those that were in protection mode of their kids. If I was standing around saying, "Hey, you want to go to Taco Bell afterwards?" I'm sure there were some dads that were saying, "Oh God, no, not now. Don't let." I'm sure it was like that. But something happened to Moses, that happened to David, that happened to Paul, who was formerly Saul. The now and destiny crossed roads. And a moment happened, a moment of grace happened in their lives. And that moment of grace happens in our lives. And it doesn't happen just once. It happens again and again and again. But for us to be the portals to the peephole into what hope is really about, we have to go through some very difficult times. We have to go through some very difficult times. Now, sometimes those difficult times are something we had nothing to do with. But for most of us, difficult times are things that we chose and we didn't even realize we were choosing that difficult road. Isn't it right? We didn't even realize. If we'd have known, we wouldn't have chose that. My mother, if she'd have known that the end result of all those years of smoking tobacco would have ended in COPD and emphysema and having to tug around oxygen all the time, if she'd have known that, I know my mother, she would not have chosen that course. She would have done something different. But she didn't know. She didn't know, and now she's here and she doesn't complain about it. And so for you and I to be that portal of grace, for you and I to have a fresh start, for you and I to imagine more, we've got to reframe hardship. We've got to reframe difficulties. We've got to look at difficult situations differently. And what are they? For you and I who really imagine more, that really want a fresh start, and to reframe that, what we've got to do is see change as opportunity. We've got to move to a place where we see hardship as really a gift, to be the portal, to clean off the lens, so that those people that are around us, that we meet with, that we have influence with, that's outside of this cocoon of safety and peace and love and acceptance, when they get around us, they see what hope and what grace can be like. And now we're able to speak grace and mercy and redemption to them. Isn't that a wonderful place to be? The only way to get there is we have to move from complaining and oh-meing and oh-mying to, you know what, grace is a good thing. And be able to really thank God for the process, don't we? Thank him for the process. I want you to pray with me for a second. Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for your grace in our lives. Thank you that when real grace happens in our lives, we become thankful people. And that thankfulness abounds to the very glory of the eternal one God. Lord, I thank you that you give us that opportunity on a regular basis. And I wonder if there's anybody in this room that really needs a fresh start on grace. If you're here and you need a fresh start on grace, an ability to imagine more greatness in your life, could you just raise your hand and just acknowledge that you need a fresh start of grace? Yes, yes. A couple of hands. Maybe you are a person that you've not really embraced this whole idea of grace and living, and you're here because you were invited here, and you someday want to have a relationship with the eternal. You want your now to come in crossroads with destiny. Would you just raise your hand and let me see that? Anybody at all? Maybe you know you're supposed to be a portal of grace for people, and you need courage to be that portal of grace. You could raise your hand. Yes, yes. Hands all over the building. Father, thank you for these, your people, who have raised their hand in acknowledgement that they need more and they want to imagine more. Father, I pray that you would continue to do that work in their lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Just before I turn it over to Tim, I want to give you a couple of things on a piece of paper right there. I want you to write down this phone number. 209-732-MATT. 209-732-MATT, and that is 6288 on your dial. That's my cell phone number. You can call me anytime. You can text me anytime, and so that we can stay in contact with each other. The second number that I'm going to give you, every Tuesday night, I lead a group study into wisdom and living your life by wisdom. I call it Thought-Filled Tuesday Nights. Thought-Filled Tuesday Nights. And what we do at 7 o'clock, we begin, and we spend about 5 or 10 minutes in just kind of re-getting acquainted. And then for about 30 minutes, I teach. And then for the additional hour, we spend in dialogue back and forth and asking questions. The way for you don't have to go anywhere. It's free. All you have to do is dial this phone number, 805-399-1000. 805-399-1000. And when you dial that in, what will happen is you'll be asked to give your participant code, which is 593915. 593915. On your cell phone, most of you have free long distance. So if you call on your cell phone, there will be no long distance charges. If you're at home, when you call that number, whatever your plan is at your house, you'll be charged accordingly. But it's free between you and I. And what we do, we spend an hour together dialoguing about those kind of things. This Tuesday night, we're talking more about the courage to say no. Because I think most of us go down a trail that's filled with briar bushes and stickers and thorns because we didn't have the courage to say no. And we are talking right now about how to have that courage to say no. And I, for one, am embracing the courage to say no, because I've made some pretty big mistakes because I didn't have the courage to say no. Okay? Thank you so much. Tim?